Namaskaram. We are starting with a chapter of advance ruling. There are two words which is used in this title of the chapter. Ruling means judgment, and advance you already know, in advance. That means you have to take judgment from department before entering into any transaction. That's advance ruling. You might have heard the phrase prevention is better than cure. When Vodafone India case has happened with income tax department, that case has created a negative image of Indian tax structure in global players. And therefore, many foreign organizations are actually afraid to do business with India or in India. We have already launched so many tax incentives and policies through which we are inviting foreign players to conduct businesses in India. We are having Make in India concept, we are having Digital India concept, we are having Startup India, so many things. And our government is proposing all big foreign players to have their manufacturing establishment in India. One thing is hurting them, and that's a complex tax structure. How do we reduce that, the complexity or the image or the one kind of intention which is created in the minds of this non-resident? So advance ruling is the solution. Now non-resident, before entering into India, he can come to income tax department and he can ask for possible tax applications on his transaction. What will happen? Whether transfer pricing provisions will be applicable, whether it is a impermissible avoidance arrangement, whether there will be any consequence of penalty. And let me tell you one more beautiful thing about it. Advance ruling is not only in the income tax law. The same chapter is created in GST law and customs law, meaning thereby this non-resident will get response to all his possible question related to Indian taxation on the single window. Therefore, the concept of advance ruling is very important. Let's look at it. Chapter 29B, consisting sections 245N to section 245V, which provides scheme for giving advance ruling in respect of transactions involving non-resident or specified resident. Originally, this chapter was created only for non-resident. Later on, government felt that even some only specified residents should also avail the benefit of advance ruling. Therefore, they have amended the law with a view to avoiding needless litigation and promoting better taxpayer relations. If something happens, like if NR conducts the transaction to the tune of 1000 crore with India, and later on you tell him that this particular transaction falls under GAR provision, GAAR provision, General Anti-Avoidance Rule provision, and you are exposed to penalties, obviously it will hurt the sentiment of non-resident. Before he could enter into a transaction, we should tell him whether he should enter or he should not enter, and if he enters, what will be the possible tax consequences. That's what is advance ruling. So there are certain definitions that we must know. The most important definition is who can take the advantage of advance ruling or who is the applicant under the advance ruling. Advance ruling means ruling determined by the authority in relation to transaction which has been undertaken or is proposed to be undertaken, either undertaken or proposed to be undertaken by a non-resident. So look at the clauses. 245N, clause A, subclause 1 talks about a non-resident applicant can apply. Clause 2 or subclause 2, in relation to the tax liability of a non-resident. Look at the wordings. You may get confused with the wordings of the law. In relation to the tax liability of a non-resident arising out of a transaction which has been undertaken or is proposed to be undertaken by a resident applicant with respect to such a non-resident, and such determination shall include the determination of any question of law or question of fact specified in the application. The point 1 talks about here applicant is equal to non-resident. In point 2, applicant is equal to resident, but resident is not applying for his own tax determination. He is applying for tax determination of a non-resident with whom he is going to conduct any business or he has conducted a business. Ultimately, in point 1 and point 2, we are protecting non-resident. Let's go forward. in relation to a tax liability of a resident, this is a resident applicant, arising out of a transaction which has been undertaken or proposed to be undertaken by such applicant, and such determination shall include the determination of any question of law or question of fact specified in the application. Here definitely applicant is a resident and only resident, but in my word I call them large corporates. I call them large corporates. So what do you mean by large corporates? A large corporate means they wanted to discuss a question which involves minimum 100 crore. Please understand, meaning thereby this particular clause which were this advance ruling facility which were only available for non-resident is also made available for resident assessee now, obviously subject to certain conditions. Next one, in respect of an issue relating to computation of total income which is pending, very important word, which is pending before any income tax authority or appellate tribunal, and such determination or decision shall include the determination or decision of any question of law or question of fact in relation to such computation of total income specified in such application. Here we are having applicant which is notified resident, in another language it is PSU, public sector undertaking. Sir, how do you know about it? Obviously it is included in the definition which will come now. I'm just trying to tell you in advance itself so that you will try to create one particular thought. And the last one, determination of decision whether an arrangement which is proposed to be undertaken by any person being a resident or a non-resident. Here applicant can be resident or a non-resident, in relation to which is an impermissible avoidance arrangement referred in chapter 10A or not. So something whether some transaction is equal to impermissible avoidance arrangement IAA under GAR provision. Okay, whether particular transaction is equal to IAA, impermissible avoidance arrangement or not. To confirm this, you can go and put an application in advance ruling. Now look at the definition of applicant. That was the definition of transaction. Now look at the definition of applicant. Applicant means any person who is a non-resident referred in clause 1. Please understand, as I told you in clause 1 it was non-resident, or is a resident referred in clause 2. So in clause 2 it is a resident, but resident in relation to, please understand, resident in relation to transaction with non-resident. Next one is a resident referred in relation to clause 2A above falling within such class or category or a person as notified by the government in official gazette, and who has been notified, a person who is having turnover more than 100 crore. A resident in relation to his tax liability arising out of one or more transaction valuing 100 crore or more. So please understand, the tax liability should value 100 crore or more. Please understand, a resident in relation to his tax liability arising out of one or more transaction. So transaction value should be 100 crore or more in a total which has been undertaken or proposed to be undertaken. So this 100 crore limit is very important. Large corporate. And the fourth one is a public sector company, as I have told you, is applicable to public sector company that is also notified, who makes an application for advance ruling. So this is an application. Now on account of the merger, please understand, on account of merger of authority for advance ruling for income tax, central excise, custom duty, service tax. Earlier these wordings were there, excise and all. Right now you know that instead of excise and service tax we are having GST. That means there was a time when advance ruling authority for direct tax was different, for customs it was different, for excise it was different. So a non-resident was getting confused how many applications he has to make. Now because they have merged the authority, it is a single window where NR has to go and he will get answer not only for income tax but also for custom, but also for excise, but also for GST, all direct and indirect taxes. Yeah. Who can be applicant? So whatever we have discussed now, based on that, this kind of question can be asked in exam. Okay. Who can be applicant in relation to different clauses? Or who can be applicant? Whenever the question is raised on applicant, this is what you should remember. This is a summary of what we have discussed so far. Ultimately, this is what you are supposed to remember. Earlier it was bare act, now it is the summary that you should remember from your examination point of view. So, applicant can be a non-resident. Please understand, a transaction which has been undertaken or proposed to be undertaken by him. So, NR can be applicant. sir, even R can be applicant, but R is not asking for himself. R is asking for tax liability of NR, which is arising out of transaction is going to be conducted with NR. Okay, these are the two. First and second is very easy. Non-resident and resident in respect of tax liability of non-resident. The third one, resident or class of category person notified by central government. And who has been notified by the central government? Sir, that resident who the transaction value is more than 100 crore. That resident who the transaction value is 100 crore or more. So this is also very important. So next one, a resident or class category which is notified by the government, and here we are having public sector undertaking. Public sector undertaking is like, it's given very special status in advance ruling. Whatever ordinary person cannot do, a public sector company can do, a public sector undertaking can do, because it's a government entity. And because it's a government entity, we don't have any turnover criteria or transaction criteria here. They can go for 1 crore rupees transaction, 10 crore rupees transaction, and even 1000 crore rupees transaction. So there is no limitation for public sector undertaking like we are having for any other organization. And lastly, who can be applicant, sir? Lastly, a resident or non-resident can be applicant to check whether the transaction that he is going to conduct is a resident or is impermissible avoidance arrangement or not. And here it can be anybody. Okay. Now what you should remember, when we have discussed the first three clauses, which three clauses, sir? A non-resident clause, a non-resident can be applicant, a resident in respect of non-resident, and then I told you resident which is notified where the transaction value is more than 100 crore. Okay, transaction value is more than 100 crore. In these three cases, you can apply even when your case is not pending. Please understand, even when the case has not started. So why? Because in these three cases, you can go to advance ruling authority even for proposed transaction. How can you say the transaction should be pending or the case should be pending before the authority? Compare this point with your settlement commission. Whenever you have to make application to settlement commission, your case must be pending. Here, there is no requirement of the pendency. Here, case can be pending or may not be pending. Please understand, it may be pending or may not be pending. But when we talk about public sector undertaking, there they have written, I have asked you to box that particular word, in case of pending litigation. Please understand, only when matter is pending, then only a public sector undertaking can go there. So far as impermissible arrangement, you can anytime go and ask. There is no requirement of pendency. So pendency is required only in one case, and that is public sector undertaking. Yeah.